Okay, today we're going to be learning Pesachim, Daf Kaf Zayin. Today's daf is sponsored by Rivka Bluestein and Judah Bellin in honor of their mother and mother-in-law, Marcy Goldstein. Your daily learning inspires both of us to continue learning Daf Yomi as well. Sharing our first joint siyum together was a joy, and we hope to share many more siyumim together in the future. Happy birthday. And by Asher Rosa in honor of his wife's birthday, Yafit Pishbach. Yafit's daily daf learning brings much light and knowledge into our home. May God bless her with the strength and willingness to keep at it one day at a time. And by Shandel Shapiro, memory of her father, Reuven ben Tevye, Zichrono Livracha, Reuven Bressler, on his 30th year at this Chanukah. May his neshama have an aliyah. With that, we're going to get started. Back to the bottom of Kaf Vav Amud Bet. What we saw yesterday, we ended with this contradiction between two brightot. We were talking about someone who uses wood that is forbidden to benefit from. And with that wood, they took it and they put it in an oven. Now, there were two different scenarios. One was it was a brand new oven. And in order to initiate the oven and to kind of harden it, so that basically created an isur, right? The oven was created in a forbidden manner because it was using eitzim that were problematic. And therefore, the first Braita said, you have to break this oven. The second Braita said, actually, let's go to the second case. The second case is the oven was created in a fine manner. You then put in wood that was forbidden for use, and you then baked your bread using that wood. Okay, the example I'm going to go back to today is I'll give you an example from my life. So my kids, one of my daughter and my nephew during the first round of Corona here, when people had not a lot to do, they decided it was a good idea to spend our time and we'll build a pizza oven. So they built a pizza oven for our backyard. I now realize learning the sugya that it was very helpful to me to use the pizza oven to understand the sugya much better. Because when you build a pizza oven, so besides, okay, so you have to heat it up to make it. And in this case, actually, you didn't need to heat it up to make the oven work. But the way of cooking in the oven is we're going to discuss today. So what do you do? I'll just give you the background. This isn't yet relevant, but you put in the wood, or actually it's already kind of relevant because you'll see. You put in the wood, you light it up on fire, right? Anyone who makes a bonfire knows this, right? You light it up on fire, then what happens? The wood turns to coals basically over time, right? You leave it. You don't usually cook, right? All of a sudden you end up with this big flame in the middle of the oven. Now, the people in my house who are impatient sometimes cook at that stage, and we'll get back to that later, okay? Where you don't wait for the fire to die down if you're lacking patience, but that's really not the way you're supposed to cook the pizza, right? You wait till it dies down. You end up with these coals, and they're kind of fiery red. And then we'll get to, right, what happens after. You end up with these coals that are blackened, okay? Now, the question is, at what point are those, that wood is not even considered, let's say that I lit up my fire with wood that was forbidden b'hana'ah, right? They came from a tree that was kilei kerem or something along those lines, or, with twigs that came. It wouldn't be a tree because tree's not kilayim, but could, well, maybe there could, whatever. Anyway, without getting into those details. So now, at what point is it no longer considered, right? The question is, what did the pot, when we say yesh shevach etzim bepat, which Rebbe said, right? That if you bake bread with this wood that was from something that was forbidden to benefit from, you benefited from those trees, even though really there's nothing in the bread that's actually isur. It's just the heat that created it. That's number one issue. Number two, what kind of heat? It was the heat from a later stage when maybe you would say already the trees are already, the wood is burnt. It's not even a tree anymore. It's coals. So the question is, where do we draw the line? At what stage? Okay, we talked about the three stages. It's lighting up, it's a big fire, but the wood is still intact. Once it kind of turns into coals and it's fiery, or maybe the last stage where it's already nothing. So there's a clear machloket between the rabbis and Rebbe about this. That's what it said in the Braita, right? Rebbe said, if you make bread from it, yesh shevach etzim bepat, we view that as they benefited from it and therefore it's forbidden, versus Rabbanan who say, no, ein shevach etzim bepat. So we don't yet know what stage. That's going to be a machloket later on in the daf. But what we ended with was this issue of, let's say, why do we have to break the oven? We saw there was one source that says you have to break a new oven. Okay, we're back away from the bread. We're back to the pot. And another source that says you don't have to break the oven. Now, what's the machloket between them? It seems the issue is that, so first we tried to say maybe that's Rebbe and Rabbanan. Yes, Shabbat Chitzim, do we view the wood as having benefited the oven or not? But then they say, no, even if you say like Rebbe, yesh sheva chetzim bepat, and therefore yesh shevach etzim in the oven, still the oven, like my pizza oven, is useless unless I do what with it? I build a fire inside. Right now, it's just like a utensil. It's useless. The only way I can use it is by putting a fire. Now, if I make a new fire, let's say I take wood that's not forbidden to benefit from. So I made it in a way that was forbidden. But now when I want to use it and bake bread with it, right? What do? I put the bread in, right? First, I make a new fire. So now I won't put the dough in until it's fired up. At this point, it's what we call zev v'zeh gorem. There's two factors now that are going to bake my bread. One is the oven itself, because without the oven, right, I can't make pizza in a pizza oven without a pizza oven. I need the oven itself, but I also need the fire. With the oven is useless without the fire. So this is a case of zev v'zeh gorem. I have two things causing it. Now, if we have heter and isser together, now some people say this works based on dinei bitul, nullification, and maybe because of that, because one kind of nullifies the other. It's not exactly clear why zev v'zeh gorem is going to be allowed according to most opinions. We're going to see today that it seems like everybody thinks zev v'zeh gorem is mutar other than one opinion. So we're going to assume that zev v'zeh gorem. So basically we're going to say if Rebbe holds yesh shavach etzim b'pat, that's only in a case where there was one thing that caused it. That was really cooking, right? The fire was wood that was forbidden. But if the wood made the oven in a forbidden manner, but now I take fresh wood that's totally fine and I bake it, well, now I'm going to end up with two factors contributing, and it's not clear that Rebbe would say it's usher, and therefore we can't say it's Rebbe, because they're basically going to say, and you'll see this, the way they try to prove it's Rabbi Eliezer who holds that way, is that they don't really find many people who say zev v'zeh gorem is asur, and therefore they think if Rebbe would have said it, we would have known that. So now they say it must be Rabbi Eliezer. So we ended with this line that Rabbi Eliezer is the one who says zev v'zeh gorem asur. That's our braita that we started with, where it says chadash yutatz, it has to be broken in oven, and then we say chadash yutzan. The other opinion says chadash yutzan. You just need to cool it down, and then you can reuse it for anything you want after, as long as you use heter things. If it were two things of Isser, then it would be a problem. I see someone asked, right? It's just zev v'zeh gorem, meaning one is heter, one is Isser. If it's two Isser, it wouldn't be allowed. So now, hey, Rabbi Eliezer, we're a few lines from the bottom of Kaf Vav Amud Bet. So which Rabbi Eliezer? Where do we see the Rabbi Eliezer says zev v'zeh gorem is asur? Ilema Rabbi Eliezer de se'or. Maybe this case where he talks about leavening agents. Ditna se'or shachulin b'shel truma shenaflu l'toch istat. Remember, this we said is like a sourdough starter. You have one of chulin and one of truma that fell into a dough. So now what's going to happen? The combination of chulin and truma. Now truma, assuming I'm a Yisrael, is going to be a problem. I can't eat something that's made with truma. So now I have a bit of a starter of truma and a bit of a starter of chulin that fell into my dough. Each one was too small on its own to leaven the dough. And then, but together, there was enough between the two of them. So now the question is it going to be forbidden or not? Rabbi Eliezer Omer, achar acharon ani ba. It depends which one was added last. Okay, and we'll talk about this in a minute, why that's a factor. V'chachamim omrim, ben shenafal isur lechatchila, uben shenafal isur levasof, le'olam eno asur ad shehebo kadei lachmitz. No, you have to have enough in the truma one, or whatever it might be, the forbidden one, to actually leaven the bread. Because if the truma one on its own can't cause the bread to rise, then you can't say that it's forbidden, because you need enough of Isser, because this on its own wouldn't have done anything, therefore it's not going to be forbidden. So now, what does this have to do with our topic? Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela, because now we have to understand what Rabbi Eliezer says. He says it goes by the last, meaning if the last one was truma, now, okay, let's think about it the way we would understand it, because we're now going to see Abaye understands it differently. But what would you think? If truma goes in at the end, what's the problem? Well, if I hadn't added the truma, it wouldn't have risen the dough. So only because I added the truma did the dough rise, because that's the one I added last. So that's the one that actually caused the dough to rise. Whereas if I add the truma first, it won't do anything. So if I add the chulin last, and that does something, then it'll be effective. But first, the Gemara doesn't understand it that way. Abaye says, Amar Abaye, lo shanu ela. So the way Abaye understood this Mishnah is to say, lo shanu ela shekidem b'silek et ha'isur. This is only, by the way, okay, in the case, he's obviously looking at the case where the chulin went in second. If you put what's allowed second, we're going to follow the second one as long as you took out the truma, okay? But if you didn't take out that little piece of starter of the truma, asur, then it's going to be forbidden. Now, why? Why would it sound like it's forbidden if you keep it in? It must be because he thinks, even though the truma itself couldn't have done it, but it was together with the chulin, and it caused the dough to rise. Therefore, you have isser and heter mixed in together, and he's going to say it's forbidden. Because according to Abaye, he only permits it based on if you took out the truma. But if you didn't take out the truma, it's going to be a problem. So that sounds like the issue. But the Gemara says, you don't have to read this source like Abaye did. And in fact, it doesn't make so much sense. Because Dilma, Tamad Rabbi Eliezer, Mishum de Achar Acharon Aniba. Loshna Kidem V'Sileket HaYisur, Loshna Lo Kidem V'Sileket HaYisur. Rabbi Eliezer might be saying exactly what I suggested earlier, which is it all goes by what in the end was the one that did it. This reminds me, by the way, we'll get to this case in Sanhedrin, of 10 people each hit a person. Okay, they beat somebody, like a gang beat up. And one person hits the first person, right? One person hits the first blow, the second person, the second blow, the third. What if the person dies in the end on the last blow, right? So who's responsible? It's true. If the 10th had just beaten him one blow, he wouldn't have died. But because he did it after there were already 9 blows, then, right? So is he responsible? I'm not going to tell you what it says there. You'll have to wait. But this sounds very much like it. So he says, maybe the reason is because, right? It's all the matter of if you put in the truma first, nothing would have happened, right? And then because you added the chulin after, that's what caused the dough to rise. So it's on account of the chulin, and that's why it's allowed. But then you can infer from here, right? Or the reverse. If you put the truma second, then it's the truma, right? The truma is what made it rise, and therefore the truma is at fault. Aval, but that's only if they went in one after the other. Aval bevat achat hachanami deshare. But if you put them both in at the exact same time, then we would think that it would be allowed, because he would say in that case, in other words, this is all just to say, he doesn't necessarily need to say zev gorem is mutal. He could be saying, asul. He could be saying zev gorem is mutal, and theoretically, he's only talking here about a case where you put one in after the other. Theoretically, if you put them both in at the same time, it could be he would say it's allowed because zev gorem. Because if you put them both in at the same time, then, right, if the 10 people beat up the person at the exact same time, there wouldn't even be a question, right? They're all equally responsible. But in this case, right, we're going to have it. So therefore, you might say maybe it's allowed then because maybe he holds zev gorem is mutal. And therefore, it would be a different case. So they say it's not that, Rabbi Eliezer. So they're going to try something different. Ela Rabbi Eliezer da'atzei Asherah. Okay, now we're going to have a brighta. Now, what's interesting about this, I'll already tell you, there's a machloket, Rabbi Eliezer and the rabbis, or a Tanakama. We don't know who Tanakama is. Both of them are going to actually hold that zev gorem is asur. Why do they say then it's Rabbi Eliezer and not the Tanakama? Because we don't know who the Tanakama is. Okay, so what we mean is it's Rabbi Eliezer, and whoever he disagrees with in this source, they both seem to indicate zev gorem is asur, and that's distinct from everybody else that doesn't. Okay, and you'll see that at the end of this, where they basically say, well, nobody else says this, and therefore it must be them. So let's see. Here's a case now. Instead of talking about wood that came from some sort of isur na'ah, like orla, right, one of the tree in the first 3 years, or kilei kerem. Now we're going to talk about wood that came from atzei asherah, avodah zarah. Okay, this is a tree that the people worshipped for avodah zarah, and you want to use something from this tree. Ditna, and here we're going to see it's the exact same case as ours. Natal hemena etzim. If you took wood from this tree, asurim b'hana'ah, you can't benefit from them. So here comes our case. Hisik behen et hatanur, chadash yutatz, yashan yutzan. Afabo et hapat, asura b'hana'ah. Okay, so if you light up your oven, if it's brand new, you have to break it. If it's old, you have to cool it down. Afabo et hapat, if you baked bread in it, then asura b'hana'ah will be forbidden to benefit from. Nit arva ba'achirot. Now let's say, okay, so the first thing you have to realize, again, there's going to be a debate between Rabbi Eliezer and Tanakama, but already in the beginning they say exactly our point, which is if you light up a fire inside this brand new oven and it causes the oven to basically harden, and it does what we need to do for an earthenware vessel to heat it up in order to make it usable, you have to break it. Okay, even though what's going to happen if you go to break bread later with mutar wood, with wood that has no problem, it'll be a case of zev ze gorem, and yet it's going to be forbidden. That's why they make you break it, because there's no way to use this oven. But the Braita continues, and here they have a debate about something specific, which again doesn't really matter for our purposes. The point is they both agree with the beginning, they disagree about the continuation. If you bake bread in this oven with atzei ashera, so when you go to make your pizza, you use wood from an ashera tree, asura b'hana'ah, you cannot benefit from the bread. This is the case, right? This is what we said, like Rebbe. Nit arva ba'achirot, 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 kulan asurim b'hana'ah. Let's say that pizza that you made that day fell into a batch of a whole bunch of other pizzas that weren't made from the same wood, right? That were permitted. And then one from that batch falls into another batch. All of this is suffix avodah zarah. And what do we say? All are forbidden to benefit from. Now, it's the whole batch of them. Rabbi Eliezer actually thinks this is a huge loss and he doesn't want to make this happen. So he suggests something else. Yolich hana'ah li Yam HaMelech. Okay, Yam HaMelech is always the place, the Dead Sea, that we talk about if you want to destroy something and you can, that's the place that's going to be the most destroyed, because if you put something in regular water, maybe it won't be totally destroyed, but in Yam HaMelech with all the salt, it'll be utterly destroyed. So what does he say? Since they're asurim b'hana'ah, right? Normally, what do? We either burn something or we could throw it in Yam HaMelech. He says, take the amount. You have now, let's say, 50 loaves of bread that now all are the one that's made from avodah zarah. So you take the amount of money that, now here, that fill in the blank is a machloket, okay? But you take the amount of money that you benefited from that bread being baked by atzei ashera, and I'll give you the two possibilities. Some people say the value of that one loaf of bread, okay, whatever that was. But some people say, and this is always the problematic part of this whole case, the bread is not actually, doesn't have avodah zarah in it, right? It's just that it was cooked with the heat of avodah zarah. So some people say that still makes this, the whole value of this loaf is a problem. So throw away the value of a loaf of bread. You take something else that equals that value and you throw it into the sea. Some people, or you take money, and the money also you can throw into Yam HaMelech. Some people say we're talking about the value of the wood that you used, because that's what's actually avodah zarah, and it's the value of the wood that you used, and you throw that into Yam HaMelech. Okay, so either way, you have to throw something in Yam HaMelech. That's kind of takes the place of, it shows, oh, I'm taking a loss for what happened, and then that will allow you to eat all the other loaves. As I said, we're a bit off topic. This doesn't really have to do with our case. Amru lo, they said to him, Ein pidyon la'avodah zarah. No, this is avodah zarah. You can't, this is idol worship. You can't redeem idol worship. No, this is very serious, and we don't allow you to do it in that way that you think, Rabbi Eliezer. The point is, okay, that again, both Rabbi Eliezer and Tanna Kama seem to agree, not about the bread case, there they have a disagreement, but about the oven case. If it was a brand new oven, you have to break it. So there you see, zev ze gorem, because the next time you bake in that oven, it'll be heter, fire, with oven that's problematic. And it'll be zev ze gorem. And what do you see? It's forbidden. That's why you have to break the oven. So the Gemara says, why are you learning from this case to Rabbi Eliezer? There's a problem. Why? Avodah zarah is very stringent. Notice his case. The case he picked was avodah zarah. It wasn't kilayim, orla, things like that. Maybe he wouldn't agree when it comes to other things. Maybe he's just very strict there. Right? Who's to say? So here comes a very interesting answer. The Gemara says, well, if it's not him, then who? That's basically the next line. Elin came aman tirmia. So who are we going to attribute this braita to? This is the closest source we have to somebody saying zev ze gorem is asur. We don't have any other source where it says zev ze gorem would be asur. So if that's the case, so what else are we going to do with this braita? We have nobody else to attribute it to. That's why I said in the beginning, they didn't want to say that Rebbe must hold zev ze gorem is asur because they don't have any source to say that, and no one else, right? And no, we never said anywhere that Rebbe would hold this way. And if we would assume that if he did hold this way, he would have said so. So therefore, it's a very interesting response. Now, you'll see that they bring another answer, because maybe that's not sufficient, because we all know that there were braitot floating around and people didn't necessarily know all the braitot and all that. And it could very well be there's someone else who says it. So it's not the greatest answer, but it's an interesting answer. They're basically saying, well, this is the closest source, and it is pretty close. It's the exact same halacha. It's just it happens to be an avodah zarah versus something else. But they're basically saying, otherwise, we have nobody else to attribute it to. And secondly, ve'od Hatanya behedya. It actually says explicitly in a Braita, v'chein haya Rabbi Eliezer oser b'chol isurin shebatorah. Obviously, they didn't know that in the beginning, otherwise they would have brought it before. But it says not only did he hold this way in Avodah Zarah, he also holds this about everything else. So there, they've proven it. Okay, that's our Rabbi Eliezer. Amar Abaye. Now we're going to go back to Rebbe. We started with Rebbe and we said maybe the Braita is Rebbe, Chadash Yutatz. And maybe that's Rebbe who holds we have to break the oven because, and then we said, well, we're not sure what Rebbe holds. Maybe he holds Zevazeh Gorem is mutar. We don't know. So now Abaye is going to say, whether he says Zevazeh Gorem is mutar or whether he says it's asur, I'm going to tell you that that would only be in a particular case. But in another case, he'd still say it's forbidden. Now, that's what we're going to go through. We're going to distinguish between three cases. We have that by bread, he says, yesh shavachitzim b'pat, right? When it comes to the oven, we're not really sure, okay? So, imtim tzalomar zevazeh gorem asur, Rebbe hainu Rabbi Eliezer. If you're going to say that Rebbe holds zevazeh gorem is forbidden, then we'd say he holds like Rabbi Eliezer. But imtim tzalomar zevazeh gorem mutal, or maybe he says no. When it's zevazeh gorem, when it's the oven that was created problematic manner, and now you want to make bread with a permitted fire, maybe he holds it's mutal. And the only reason why he forbids the bread is because that's bread that you baked with problematic wood. But if you took regular wood, it would be okay, even in an oven that was created in an improper manner. However, okay, so that's why I said we're putting these two opposite, right? We have the oven on the one hand and the bread on the other. So the oven, we don't know what he holds. The bread, we know. Okay, so the bread is problematic no matter what, even if he holds zevazeh gorem is mutal, because it's not a case of zevazeh gorem. It's one factor is contributing, which is the fire. Okay, it's interesting that they don't think fire and the oven. They don't say, well, the oven was okay, was made in an okay manner, and it's mixed with this fire. That they don't say, because the fire is really the main factor here. Right? I can't use my pizza oven unless I make a fire in it, right? It's useless without it. It's only when the oven was problematic do we say maybe zevazeh gorem will allow it. Okay, that's just an interesting point to put aside. Anyway, now he's going to bring an in-between example, or an example that's more like the bread. Okay, okay, what is he saying? Let's say I make, okay, let's say it's a kiln, and I make bowls or cups or dishes in that kiln with, right? So now the oven was okay, but now I put in a fire and I make the fire with whatever it is that's forbidden. And in that kiln now, I make some dishes. Now dishes, what's the issue? It's like the bread, basically. I have one factor contributing to it. And it's not like the oven because the dishes are for use immediately. It's not like the next time I use the dish, I have to do something to it. That dish was made in a forbidden manner. And now I'm going to use it after it was made in that forbidden manner. So basically, we're going to say, if you say the pot is a problem, yesh shavachitzim b'pat, yesh shavachitzim in the formation of these karot and kosot and slichuyot. Ki plige, what will they have a debate about? Bitanur, as we said before, because a tanur, again, is nothing. You can't put anything in that oven. My pizza oven is useless, unless I want to maybe store items outside or something, but it's useless unless I'm going to bake something in it, and then I need to make a fire first, which will be a permitted thing, and then I'll have a combo. What else would be like that? A kdera, a pot, because a pot is useless unless what? Again, I make a fire underneath the pot. So if I form this pot in a forbidden manner, and then the only way I can use it is basically by making a fire underneath, again, when I go to bake in it, to cook in it, I'm going to be cooking with heter and isur, the pot, which is isur, the fire, which is now heter, which is permitted, and I'm going to have a combo. So the tanur and the kirayim is what's going to depend on whether he holds zevazeh gorem as asur or whether he holds as mutar. But when it comes to a cup or a plate or something like that, it's just like the bread because it's usable immediately, right? You don't do anything else to it to make it work. We're going to see that not everyone agrees with this k'te'ah. If you're already thinking, what do you mean a pot? Pot can be used for other things. We'll get to that. So he says, so their machloket is tanur k'te'ah. Leman damar zevazeh gorem asur, asur. If you say it's forbidden, it'll be, if the Rebbe says it's forbidden, he'll forbid it. Leman damar zevazeh gorem mutar, shari. And the one who says it's permitted will permit it. Ika da amre. There are those who say, afilu leman damar zevazeh gorem mutar, k'te'ah asura. Why? As I said about this pizza oven, when you make pizza, you do not put dough in the pizza oven before the fire gets hot, right? Or before anything happens, right? You wouldn't just put randomly anything in there to bake. But with a pot, what do? First, you put the food in the pot, which means the pot is already acting as a receptacle before you put it on the fire. You don't generally put the pot on the fire. Maybe if you're using a frying pan, you want to heat up oil. But normally you're going to make a stew or something. You're going to put it all in the pot, and then you're going to put the pot on the flame. So the pot is more like the kosod and the sluchiyot because you use them first to put something in it as a receptacle, right? Likewise, you could say sometimes you might run out of dishes and you might use a pot to serve something in. You don't usually do that, but maybe. But the point is the pot is a receptacle in and of itself. And first you put the food in it. So it's already being used, and that would be forbidden before you put it on the fire, before it ends up in a situation of zev zegorim, which would never happen in an oven. So there's a machloket Abaye and the Ikad Amre, those who say otherwise, about this issue. And that's all just because we're not sure what Rebbe holds, and would there be a difference in these cases? Amar Rav Yosef, Amar Rav Yehuda, Amar Shmuel. We're now going to have a different version of the Braita that we saw. And we're going to get something very interesting. Tanor shisiku b'klipei orla o b'kashin shel kalei hakerem. Again, this is exactly our Braita. You light up your fire. This goes back to the Braita we saw at the end of yesterday's daf, with things that are forbidden. Chadash yutatz, yashan yutzan. Okay, if it's new, it has to be broken. If it's old, you have to just let it cool off. Afabo et hapat. Rebbe omer hapat mutechet. Chachamim omrim hapat asuran. And here's the big difference. Notice it's the opposite. Remember, Rebbe was the one who forbade. Here it says Rebbe permits. So two answers. So first the Gemara says, Bahatani Ipcha. Doesn't our Braita say the exact opposite? So they say, Shmuel Ipchatane. First answer is, Shmuel obviously had the opposite version. Well, Ibait Ema, the second option is to say, and here's the interesting line, Ba'alma kasavar Shmuel, halacha ki Rebbe mechavero velo mechaverav. Really, Shmuel had the same girsa that we did, okay? But he said it in the reverse. Why is that? Because he held, okay, everyone holds, that the halacha is like Rebbe when he argues against one person. There's all these rules, how we know who to paskin like. So the halacha is like Rebbe when he argues with one person. But when he argues with the rabbis, okay, a group of people, we don't hold like Rebbe because he's an individual versus a group of people. However, beha, in this case specifically, afilu mechaverav. This is an exception to the rule. We actually paskin like Rebbe. Now, he had our original version, which means we paskin like Rebbe that it's forbidden. Now think about it. So why did Shmuel switch it? V'savar etniye ipcha. He said, I'm going to teach it the opposite. Okay, he lied. He basically said, I'm going to teach that Rebbe says it's permitted, and the rabbis say it's asur. For what reason? So that everybody knows that it's forbidden, because people might not know that this is an exception to the rule, and therefore they'll think we paskin like the rabbis. So I'll just say that the rabbis say what Rebbe said, so that people will know what to do. Fascinating, right? That Shmuel would basically switch the opinions just so that people don't mess up the halacha, which obviously begs the question, well, what if people know that this is an exception to the rule and then they're going to get confused, right? So obviously he was pretty confident that nobody really knew this, and therefore he switched it in the interest of making sure that people keep the right halacha, which is, again, the ends justify the means, right? It's okay to lie if it's going to lead to halacha. It's a great line. Anyway, keep this, if you're writing down interesting things and the come up with the Gemara that you want to keep in mind, this is one of them. Okay, Bishla al gabe gechalim. Okay, now we said, if this was the end of the Braita, if you cook it on coals, tivrea kol hapat muteret. Everyone agrees that this is allowed. Now we're going to have to figure out, remember we talked about the three stages. First, there's a big flame, then the coals get red, and then they blacken when they start to cool down. So what stage are we talking about that everybody agrees that it's allowed? Rabbi Yehuda Amar Shmuel, Rabbi Chia bar Ashi Amar Rabbi Yochanan. There's a debate between the two of them, either Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, or Rabbi Yehuda in the name of Shmuel, or Rabbi Chia in the name of Rabbi Yochanan, Rabbi Chia bar Ashi. Chad Amar, we don't know who says what. One says, Lo shanu ela gechalim o memot. One says, we're talking about the blackened stage, when they're already kind of going out. Okay, then everyone agrees, even Rebbe will say, that's already not wood anymore. Aval gechalim lo chashot asurim. But Rebbe would say, right, if they're still fiery red, it would still be forbidden. The other one says, no, even when they're fiery red, they're still allowed, according to everybody. They're really not wood. It's not wood at that point. That's coals. So now we have to figure out what makes sense here. We understand the one who says that when they're red hot, it's a problem because that's when it bakes the bread. That's exactly what Rav says. There's shevach etzim bepat. The fact that this wood is what caused the bread to bake, that is the problem. That's exactly it. But the one who says that even Rebbe will agree that once in their fiery red, it's permitted already, then pata asal shevach etzim bepat the Rebbe hechem mishkachala. So since you only bake at stage 2, you don't bake in stage 1 when it's this big flame going on. So when is Rebbe saying that yesh shevach etzim bepat? If he thinks that already stage 2, which is the stage you bake in, is already going to be permitted. So Amar Papa Kishavu Kakinegdo. I said there were people in my house who were a little impatient and start baking the bread even when the fire's still burning high. That's the case. Okay, that's the case where Rebbe will say it's forbidden. But once it gets, according to this reading anyway, once it gets fiery red, that's already not trees anymore. It's not wood, and therefore it's not forbidden anymore. So now they say, wait a minute. If you're going to say that, something doesn't jive, because we know that the rabbis say it's allowed. So Michlal de Rabbanan de Plikale Sharu Afilu Keshavu Kakinegdo. If he's going to say stage 1 is a problem, then the rabbis are going to say, right? If the rabbis are going to permit, okay, the ones who disagree with Rebbe are going to say stage 1 and obviously 2 and 3 are all going to be allowed, then whenever is there Isur Hana'ah from wood? There's no such thing as Isur Hana'ah by wood. So what do they say? Well, there really isn't when you're burning it. According to Rabbi Yehuda, according to the rabbis, sorry, I don't know why I said Rabbi Yehuda, according to the rabbis who disagree with Rebbe, who say that ein shevach etzim bepat, they actually think as soon as you start burning the wood, it's no longer considered wood. And yet, when would he forbid wood? Amar Rabbi Ami Brachama b'shar shifa. If you make a bench out of wood, that's when wood is forbidden. So if you're talking about, let's say, orla or things like that, which are kilei keren, asherah, all those things will only be forbidden if you make a bench out of it or something like that, but not forbidden for benefit if you burn it. As soon as you start burning it, it's nothing. Okay, again, that's only one way of reading it. If you say the machloket's about stage 2, then Rabbi Yehuda would say, then the rabbis would say stage 1 is already a problem, right? It's still a problem. That when the fire is going strong, but the wood is still really wood, then it will be a problem. So it depends which way you read it. Okay, new question. Till now we talked about wood that comes from Atzei Asherah, Avodah Zarah. We talked about wood that comes from Kilei Kerem and the just blanking, and when we say Kilei Kerem and the Orla. Okay, now we're going to bring up Atzei Hekdesh. Okay, what are Atzei Hekdesh? This is wood that you sanctified to the temple. Now, usually it means that you sanctified it in order to buy something for the temple. You basically said, I'm sanctifying this wood to the temple. What you're going to do is you're going to take the money, you're going to buy with it something for the temple, okay? Which could be, you're going to buy with it something to put in the temple, or you could be buying with it an animal for a sacrifice, okay? And there's different ways you could sanctify. You could say, I'm sanctifying it to buy an animal, which is eventually what we're going to see the case is. You sanctify it to buy a sacrifice for an animal for a korban shlamim. That's what in the end we're going to say, but let's start and understand first. So Rami Bar Chama asked, Rami Bar Chama me Rav Chisda. He asked Rav Chisda the following question. Tanur she'isiku b'atzei hekdesh v'afa bo et hapat. So now you lit up your oven with wood that you sanctified to the temple, and then you baked your bread. L'Rabanan v'sharu b'kamay tamai. The rabbis who permitted it in the earlier case, would they permit it like they permitted it with Orla and Kilei Kerem? Would they permit it here also? So Amarle, hapat asura. In fact, he says, Rav Chisda answers, no, they wouldn't permit it. Okay, they permit it there, but they wouldn't permit it with hekdesh. So comes Rami Bar Chama and he asks, Uma ben zola orla. Why is this different than orla? So Amarava, Rava says, Hachi hashta. How could Rava saying? What kind of a question is that? Why are you asking? It's totally obvious. Why is it totally obvious? Because orla b'tela b'matayim hekdesh afilu be'elef lo batil. Orla has a halacha that it's nullified 1 in 200. Remember, we learned that, which is already a strict halacha, right? Normally it's shishim. And if it's more strict, it's 100. This is 200. But hekdesh, afilu be'elef lo batil. Hekdesh is never nullified at all. Okay, now what does this show? This shows that hekdesh is super significant, right? It's really important. And it's really bad, really, if it's not going to ever be nullified. And therefore, right, it doesn't really seem to have to do with this 200 versus 1,000 in Dine Bitul, but it's reflective of the fact that this is very severe. And because it's very severe, we're not going to allow it. Okay, so we're going to say, even if you lit up your fire with Atzei or with Atzei Hekdesh, it's not going to be permitted. So, but Rava comes and says, and remember, Rava was very dismissive of Rami Brahama's question. He said, what kind of question is that? We obviously know the difference between Orla and Hekdesh. But Elam Rava ikashile hakasha says, but if you have a question, I have a much better question than you do. What is it? Hello? No. Let me give you a little background. We talked recently about Me'ila. What is Me'ila? Me'ila is misuse of consecrated property. It means I took something that was consecrated and I used it. However, Me'ila is only, I didn't tell you this before, just because every time we learn a new topic, I don't want to overwhelm you with too many details, but now we're going to get to the details that are significant for our purposes. Me'ila is only true, it only is relevant if it's accidental, okay? Unwitting, shogeg. If you use consecrated property that you knew was hekdesh and you know it's forbidden to use it and you used it anyway, that's not Me'ila. The laws of Me'ila don't apply. Okay, now what are the laws of Me'ila? There's a few laws about Me'ila. Me'ila, number one, you have to bring an Asha Me'ilot. You have to return, that's a special korban, a guilt offering. Number two, you have to return the item to the temple with an additional fifth, okay, which is really a quarter, right? We've talked about that before. We'll see it again. Anyway, the third thing is that as soon as you use this consecrated property, it removes the sanctity of the item. So you've misused it. It now turns it into chulin. It's not hekdesh anymore. It's another thing about Me'ila. So they say, so here comes Rava with his question. If atzei hekdesh, as soon as you use it, it turns into chulin, well then shouldn't be forbidden to use in your oven. Once you light your fire, you've already used it for regular purposes. And then it no longer has this isor hana'an anymore. So haloma al hamasik, the person who lit it up, did Me'ila with it because he accidentally used this consecrated item. And when that happens, it's kind of magically, right? It removes the sanctity. Why does it remove the sanctity? Because you basically used it. You're saying, I don't believe this is sanctified, right? You basically removed the sanctity of it. So Amar Papa, maskinan, Valiba de Rabbi Yehuda Damal, Hekdesh b'shogeg mitchalel, b'mezid eino mitchalel. I want to keep reading and I'll explain, okay? And then we'll go back and explain the first line of Rav Papa. But let's start off with Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda holds that you have to make a jump. That's why I want to first get it, and then we'll get the jump. Rabbi Yehuda says, since Me'ila is only a law by if you did it unwittingly and not if you did it intentionally, if you misuse consecrated property by accident, then it's mitchalel. Then it becomes, right, it redeems it, basically, your act, because what's going to happen? You're going to now pay the value of it to the temple. That's going to be sanctified, plus the fifth. But it itself is no longer going to be sanctified. But that's only when there's a law of Me'ila. But b'mezid eno mitchalel. But if you do it intentionally, then it doesn't, since it's not Me'ila, the kedusha, the sanctity doesn't get removed. Now, b'mezid my time alo. So why is that not? Because kevan delav bar Me'ilahu lo nafik lehu lechulin. No nafik lechulin. Since it's not, you can't do Me'ila with intentionality. There is no such thing as Me'ila. Therefore, it doesn't turn into chulin. Only when Me'ila is there does it turn into chulin. Now, go back to our case. What did Rav Papa say? We're talking about wood that you sanctified in order to take the value of that and buy with it an animal for a sacrifice for Korban Shlamim. What's a Korban Shlamim? Korban Shlamim is a sacrifice called a peace offering. It's one that the owners eat the meat of. Now, if the owners eat the meat, there's no laws of Me'ila because it's not consecrated. This is what we call Kodshim Kalin. There's only Me'ila for Kodshe Kodshim. Okay, I'll just mention it very minorly. Once you slaughter the animal and burn it you burn certain parts on the altar, right? You just sprinkle the blood and then you burn the parts on the altar. Once you sprinkle the blood, then Me'ila kicks in for a little while just for those parts that have to be burned on the altar. But at this early stage, there's definitely no Me'ila before you even bought the animal, because most of the shlamim you will consume. So it's not sanctified. So if that's the case, he says that must be what it is. Just like if you did it intentionally, there's no Me'ila. Likewise, if you do it with an item that doesn't have Me'ila associated with it, meaning you designate it to the temple to buy an animal for a korban shlamim, which isn't under the laws of Me'ila, shnamim nami kevan delav bar Me'ila nenu lo nafka lechulin. That's why when you burn it, it doesn't turn into chulin because it's not misuse of consecrated property under the category of Me'ila. Okay, it's a problem, but it's just not Me'ila. So therefore, it won't go to chulin. Now that all was premised on the assumption that if you do use it for me'ila, it will turn into chulin. So now they're going to actually ask this. Is that really true? That anytime you use something that's sanctified for purposes, it becomes chulin then? It says in a braita, kol hanisrafin efran mutar. If something's supposed to be burned, then once you burn it, the ashes are permitted for use. Chutz mi, other than what exceptions to the rule? Number one, atzei ashera, avodah zarah, because we already said avodah zarah is much more severe, meaning it never leaves. It's always considered avodah zarah, even the ashes. Ve'efer hekdesh le'olam asur. And not only that, but the ashes from hekdesh, sanctified items, are always forbidden, meaning it sounds like they don't turn into chulin after you do me'ila, or for all intents and purposes, after you did the mitzvah. Remember, we talked about that the other day. So Amirami Barchama, okay, we're going to have two answers. One, maybe when it says efer hekdesh le'olam asur, that's a case where a fire, just something caught fire and not that somebody used it, right? Before we were talking about somebody put it in the oven, they used it and they did me'ila with it because they used something that was consecrated for their own purposes. But maybe when it says efer hekdesh le'olam asur, it's only in the case where there is no me'ila, where it just burnt on its own. And then we're going to say, oh, you have something that was sanctified that got burnt in a fire? Oh, that still has hekdesh to it because there was no, you have to have me'ila in order to turn into chulin. And this could be a case where there was no me'ila. Rav Shmaya Amal, ba'otan shetunim geniza, maybe that line, efer hekdesh le'olam asur, is only talking about things that need to be buried, that we learned about already. Remember, the Trumat Hadeshen is always going to be forbidden even once it's ashes. And that was that was the whole thing we saw yesterday. Right? It was a unique halacha for that. Tanya. Then they quote the Braita we saw the other day. V'samo benachat, v'samo kulo. This is you put it next to the mizbeach. You put it nicely. Don't throw it. You put it, the whole thing you put. V'samo shelo yifazer. And the Rambam says yifazer means don't spread it around. The Rambam says shelo yitpazer, that it shouldn't be scattered, meaning you have to keep it there. You can't use it for any other purpose. Okay, now we're going to go to Rabbi Yehuda. Maybe this is why I got confused before. I was saying Rabbi Yehuda. So I was thinking of Rabbi Yehuda at the end of the daf. So Rabbi Yehuda says, "Ein biur chametz ela b'sreifa." Remember, he says that the only way to get rid of your chametz is by burning it. So now we're going to start along Braita about where does Rabbi Yehuda prove that it has to be burnt, and where do the rabbis prove it doesn't have to be burnt? You can get rid of it in any way. You can throw it in the water. You can scatter it to the birds. You just have to get rid of it. It doesn't have to be burnt. So Tanya, Amar Rabbi Yehuda, Ein biur chametz ela sreifa. Okay, has to be burnt. We're now going to have a Braita that basically is a discussion. This often happens. Our Mishnayot usually don't have it back and forth. It usually says this one said that one says that. Sometimes there's a little back and forth, but often in Braita we see a long back and forth, and that's what we're going to see today. It's going to go into tomorrow's daf also. V'hadin noten. Okay, what's din? Din is usually right logic, and usually we're going to start with a kal v'chomer. So uman notal, we're going to learn it from notar. Remember, that's the leftover meat from the time it's no longer allowed to be eaten. It's supposed to be burned. So, it doesn't say anywhere that you can't see notar, you can't find it in your house, you can have it, you're just supposed to burn it. And yet, ta'un sreifa. So, chametz, which is more chamor, not only is it asur b'achila, not only is it asur b'hana, also you can't see it or find it in your house. Lo kol sheken ta'un sreifa, all the more so, it should need sreifa. So come the rabbis and they say, this is a bad kal v'chomer. Why? Kal v'chomer means something's lighter, something's more severe. Therefore, we're going to give the strict halacha to the item that's more severe. The strict halacha that is in the weak one is going to end up there. But they say this strict halacha actually leads to a leniency. And when a kal v'chomer leads to a leniency in the stricter item, that doesn't work. Because the whole idea is we're supposed to make it strict. But when the strictness leads to a leniency, that knocks out the kal v'chomer. So what's the leniency here? So they say, Amru lo. Anytime you make a kal v'chomer that at first it makes it more severe, but in the end it makes it more lenient, eino din, it's not a kal v'chomer. Now, what's the issue here? What if you have to burn it, according to Rabbi Yehuda, has to be burned? So what does that mean? Lo matzah etzim l'sorfo yehe yashevu batel. If you don't find wood to make a fire, according to this, well, you don't have to burn it. That's going to lead to a leniency then. According to you, you're going to end up not burning this chametz and not getting rid of it at all. And the Torah says you have to get rid of it. So by you saying only burning, it sounds like a stringency, but it's actually a stringency that leads to a leniency. Because if you don't have fire, wood, then you're not going to be able to burn it, and you don't have to, according to Rabbi Yehuda. So therefore, you can't learn a kal v'chomer from here because there's actually a leniency. So Chazar Rabbi Yehuda v'danot din acher. He says, fine, you don't want a kal v'chomer, I'll give you a law of comparison. I'll say these two are the same. Then you don't have to worry about that issue that you mentioned. So what is it? We're still going to learn it from notar. Notar asor b'achila, v'chametz asor b'achila. Oh, it's just like notar, and that notar is forbidden to eat. And chametz is forbidden to eat. So ma notar b'sreifa, af chametz b'sreifa. So since notar gets burned, chametz gets burned. So amrulo, they said to him, that's a bad proof. Nivela tochiach shasura b'achila ve'ena tuna sreifa. Remember the nivela, you don't have to burn. You can give it to your dog. You can give it to someone else, right? Basically, nivela should prove it's forbidden to eat, and yet eno ta'un sreifa, and you don't have to burn it. So therefore, it doesn't mean everything that's asur b'achila. You can't make that comparison. It's not a valid comparison. Amar lahen hefresh. No, you can distinguish between nevela and notar, and therefore only learn it from notar. Why? Notar asur b'achila u'b'hana'ah. Notar is forbidden both to eat and to benefit from. And chametz asur b'achila u'b'hana'ah, whereas nevela, remember, is only forbidden to eat and not to benefit. So he says, I'll clarify my words. When I said isur achila, I meant achila and benefit. So, ma notar ta'un sreifa, af chametz ta'un sreifa. Amru lo. Said, but wait, I'll find you something that's both forbidden to eat and forbidden to benefit from and doesn't need to be burned. Shor niskal yochiach, the shor, the ox that you're supposed to stone, will prove it. That's asur b'achila u'b'hana'ah, and it doesn't need to be burned. Amar lehen, he says to them back, hefresh, I'll tell you a distinction. Notar asur b'achila u'b'hana'ah ve'anush karet, you get karet for it. Chametz asur b'achila u'b'hana'ah ve'anush karet. Likewise for chametz. Chametz and notar both have karet associated with them, in addition to forbidden to eat, forbidden to benefit. Man notar b'sreifa, af chametz b'sreifa. Amru lo, they said to him, chelbo shel shor niskal yochiach. Wait a minute. Now this is a very interesting answer. They say, it's true the shor niskal doesn't have karet, but there's some element of it. The chelev of that, remember the forbidden fats, which are forbidden on any animal, and if you eat them, you get karet. Likewise, the chelev of the shor niskal. So now you have a combo. There's some element of the shor niskal that is both forbidden to eat, forbidden b'hana'ah, and you get karet for, and therefore that will prove that you're wrong. And yet, eno ta'un sreifa. Okay, we'll enter for today. We'll pick up in tomorrow's shir, the shir for Shabbat from the top of the page, and we'll finally finish where Rabbi Yehuda ends up proving it, and we'll have an interesting retort of some of the rabbis about Rabbi Yehuda at the end of this whole diyun. Shabbat shalom, and last day of Hanukkah Sameach for everybody.